All right, so tonight we are so pleased to welcome Alexis Brooks. Alexis Brooks is a registered dietitian using holistic approaches to approach health and well-being. She holds her master's degree in nutritional science and is an integrative and functional nutrition certified practitioner. Alexis spent 5 years working at Kaiser Permanente as an outpatient dietitian, facilitating wellness classes and providing one-on-one consultations. She worked as a clinical dietitian at one of the largest teaching hospitals in the LA area, Harbor UCLA. Finally, she served as a panelist on the 2019, 2021, and 2022 Carson Women's Health Conference. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Alexis.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Rachel, and welcome everyone to this workshop tonight. It's really nice to see everybody. There's more people than I thought there would be, so I'm really happy to see everyone interested in this topic of eating an anti-inflammatory diet. As Rachel mentioned, I'm a functional dietitian, and in my private practice, I specialize in women's health. So I talk about anti-inflammatory diet and just ways to overall live an anti-inflammatory life quite often. But what I do find is that it could be very overwhelming for people when they're thinking about how to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. They're wondering what foods they could eat, maybe what foods they should avoid. They can kind of get caught up in the elimination part of things, and they end up feeling like, oh my gosh, there's nothing I could possibly eat. And the more they look at information, just the hungrier they feel, and the more they feel like they don't have a lot of options. So my approach for today, my goal is to help give you some ways of how you can eat an anti-inflammatory diet, but make it very simple, make it practical, and make it to something that you can easily implement to your life starting today, maybe for dinner tonight. I don't know if you guys ate already, but maybe as soon as today or this week. So I will get into it. Okay, so I want to first start off with a conversation around what inflammation is. I think this can often be misunderstood too. So I really want to start us off with this, and then from there we can move on into how we can reduce our inflammatory load and how this actually looks. So inflammation, it's actually just our body's response to infection, to injury. It's our immune response. And inflammation is actually a good thing. A lot of times, I think the first thought we have when we think about inflammation is that it's a really bad thing. We want to make sure it never happens, but actually inflammation is healthy. And I'll give you some examples of why inflammation is healthy. It's your body's immune response. So if we have infection, when we have fevers, if we have a cut, if we have an injury, inflammation is what brings basically all the soldiers in to that site to clean things up, to bandage us up, and then it goes away. So it's like our bodies, our immune system soldiers, you can think of it as. But what happens is that if we have chronic inflammation, that's when it becomes an issue. So chronic inflammation, unlike just, I guess, regular inflammation, the natural inflammation, is when the inflammation just doesn't go away. So in the first context, when I talked about inflammation, how it's a good thing, it's actually a short-term thing. So notice I said that it goes away, right? So it's the soldiers come in, they do what they have to do, and then they leave. They leave the scene and all is well. But when we have chronic inflammation, the soldiers don't leave. They basically continue fighting because the trigger still remains. And when we have that chronic inflammation, it actually begins to confuse our immune system, where our immune system is no longer just clearing out things that aren't supposed to be there, like abnormal cells, like damaged tissue, like mutated cells. It's no longer just clearing those things out and leading to the repair and the recovery. It's just constantly fighting. It's not really sure at a certain point, it's not really sure what's healthy tissue and what's not healthy tissue. So in some examples, the body can then begin to fight the areas that it's not supposed to, like the healthy tissue, but then maybe just let certain areas slide, like the cells that have been damaged. So those cells can begin to grow, they can develop blood supplies, and that's an example, for how cancer can be developed. and other chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's. So we think of this type of inflammation, the chronic inflammation, as what really leads to disease and sickness. So those are the two parts of inflammation. And a really simple way to think of it can even be something that happened to me the other day. I had an eyelash fall into my eye, and so my eye got really irritated. It felt like it was starting to itch and it was turning red. My eyes were watering. That was inflammation, but I was grateful for it because eventually I got the eyelash out, the trigger was gone, and then it went away. So that's another example. Very simple, practical way of how we can think of inflammation. Okay, so what about this? Say you're at home, you're cutting up an apple and you put it on the counter. Maybe you're going for a snack or something like that for the afternoon. What happens if you just leave that apple on the counter, maybe for a couple of hours? What happens to the color of it? So you've probably seen this happen. It turns brown. So the picture that we have in the top, it's beginning to brown. So we could think of this as an example of oxidation. So basically the oxygen is attaching, or the apple is being exposed to oxygen. In the process of oxidation, it's turning brown. It's still fine. It's okay to eat. But this process happens in our body too. When we think about inflammation, is oxidation. However, if you were to squeeze some lemon on top of the apple slices and then leave it for 2 hours, you're going to notice that it's not going to have that same browning effect. The reason why is because lemon has a component called ascorbic acid, which is an example of an antioxidant. So this is the basis of really what we're going to talk about, is inflammation and a lot about antioxidants. Similar idea, if you are an avocado lover like me, maybe you cut up an avocado and you didn't finish it for some reason and it begins to brown, you can add lime to it and it's not going to have that browning process, lime or lemon to it, and it won't have that browning process. So this is really the role of an antioxidant, is that it's preventing the cellular damage from free radicals. And really for a lot of us, there's free radicals that are happening. They're around us all the time. We're being exposed to them all the time because the environmental stressors that we may have. That could be the air that we're inhaling. That could be products that we use on our skin. It could be foods that we're eating. There's a lot of stressors that can happen, and all these stressors, they basically have the same outcome of creating inflammation, having these free radicals. But an antioxidant is what combats that process. It's able to prevent the oxidation from happening. And there's a lot of antioxidants that we'll talk about today, but these are just some examples. Vitamin C, which also we could think of as ascorbic acid, like the lemon that I mentioned. Vitamin E is another example. Beta carotene, selenium, zinc, and polyphenols. So this is the overall basis of what we're going to focus on, the 5 ways for you to incorporate easily an anti-inflammatory diet into your life. So the first one is really to add more plants. And when I say this, I think a lot of times people are thinking like plants, like, are you talking about like eating like random things from outside? And it sounds really boring and it sounds like it's not flavorful and it sounds very limited and restricting. But really, when I say plants, I mean a lot of food. So that's vegetables, that's fruits, that's nuts and seeds, that's whole grains, that's herbs and spices. I didn't put it here, but legumes too also count. So like lentils, beans, peas, these are also considered plants. And the reason why I say to eat more plants is because they help to support our gut health. And our gut health is very much tied with our immune health. And reminding us again, the immune health is tied to inflammation. So 80% of our immune system actually lives within our gut. So if we're having a ton of inflammation, one of the best things that we can do for ourselves is to support our immune system through supporting our gut. So the goal is really to have at least 30 different plants per week, which may seem like a lot. It probably is a lot, but it's very doable. It's possible to do it. You could, if you're intentional about it, you can get a good 8 to 10 plants within a meal, especially if you're doing like choosing like more mixed foods. So I'll give you some examples. If you're used to having berries, if you're used to having like blueberries or strawberries, if you have mixed berries, now that those different types of berries are counting as different types of plants too. So if you did like blueberries, strawberry, raspberry, that's actually 3 plants as opposed to having 1 plant like a blueberry. Or say you're having, used to having salad. If you're used to having it like with spinach, or maybe it's arugula, or maybe it's lettuce, some type of lettuce. If you did mixed greens, now you're getting the different amount of plants that would come from whatever mixture of greens that you have. So that's like a very simple way for us to add more plants without actually having to really overthink things. We could do the same thing when it comes to nuts and seeds, doing mixed nuts versus like one type of nut or seed too. So the more diverse our diet is, the more diverse our gut microbiome is too. So that's really why we're trying to get different types of plants, is because we're trying to populate our gut bacteria with a lot of different types of bacteria, which will then improve our gut health, which improves our immune health, which helps to reduce inflammation. So as I'm talking, you might be wondering, do I have inflammation? How do I know if I have inflammation? I'm going to give you some symptoms, just so that see if you kind of can gauge whether or not you have inflammation or not. So if you have skin troubles, whether that be acne, whether you have maybe a recurrent rash, if you have eczema, if you have joint pain, if you have a lot of food intolerances, so a lot of foods that you're just not able to tolerate well, you have a hard time digesting foods, if you have migraines, if you have brain fog is a really big one. So if you just feel like you're foggy, in terms of like you're not able to concentrate very well, your memory's not the best. If you wake up fatigued, these are all examples of having inflammation. So in the beginning of our session, I mentioned some specific chronic diseases that are associated with having a lot of inflammation, but there may not necessarily be, you may not have a diagnosis, but you could still have inflammation. And again, it's really common. I think most people have some degree of inflammation just because of how we live, just because of life, just those environmental stressors that I mentioned. It could also be mental and emotional stressors. It could be the way we move or don't move. So there's just a lot of areas, but those are some examples that would kind of cue you into having, if you have inflammation. So number 1 is to get more plants. Number 2 is to flavor your foods with herbs and spices. So this is actually maybe the most fun tip to me personally. The reason why is because I really enjoy different flavors and just experimenting in the kitchen too. So even if you don't love to experiment in the kitchen, this could still be pretty fun for you, I think. But these are some examples of some herbs and spices that you might consider trying, or maybe you already do try and you didn't realize that they have an antioxidant punch. So ginger, garlic, turmeric, cinnamon, oregano, rosemary, cilantro, basil, clove, and sage. They're all really high in antioxidants, and the bonus is that they really taste good too. So you're able to enjoy your food more while also getting more antioxidants. And this, I know I said number 1 was pretty simple. If you're just like mixing things up, having more mixed items and plants versus just sticking to the one type of plant. But this is a close second in terms of simplicity, because even if you don't necessarily change the way you cook or the way you eat, this can still be really powerful of just adding something else to it without having to take a lot of time, effort, or work. So just recently, I've been traveling for the past couple of weeks, and I went to a really fun spice shop when I was in Washington, D.C. It's called the Spice Suite. And I had a really good time just looking at different types of spice blends, herb blends. So that might be something that you enjoy doing too, is just going to a spice shop. More locally, we have one in Torrance. It's called Penzies. And from there, they just have different blends. In most spice shops, they will have like herbal blends, spice blends. They may have some that have salt, but a lot of times they have options without salt too. So that could be a fun field trip, just taking some time, looking around, getting some inspiration. Even if you don't purchase an item there, you may have similar like herbs and spices in your home, and you can begin to blend them on your own based on maybe some products that you see in those shops. So that's another one. And to give you a little bit of perspective in terms of like how powerful herbs and spices can be, is begin to thinking about like how concentrated they are. So when we see, if you've ever seen like turmeric or ginger in the store versus when you see like in a powder form, for example, it's very, very concentrated. So I looked up the equivalent between doing a powder or like a herb or spice versus a vegetable or fruit. If you have half a teaspoon of oregano, it is the equivalent of half a cup of blueberries, if we're talking about just solely antioxidant power and activity, which is pretty amazing. For cinnamon, if you have, I believe it was 1 teaspoon of cinnamon is the equivalent of a cup of sweet potatoes in antioxidants. So even though they seem like they're really tiny and maybe only thinking about them for flavor, begin to change your mindset and consider them as also being powerhouses for antioxidants. Okay, so number 3 would be looking at our fats, specifically our oils. So our oils, the types of oils that we're using, whether it be in cooking or just in products that we consume, can play a really big role in how much our inflammatory load is. So oils that are seed oils, for example, like sunflower oil, canola oil, soybean oil, safflower, palm, grapeseed oils, these are pro-inflammatory, meaning that they are providing more inflammation. They cause more inflammation in our bodies. They have omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory, especially if it's not balanced off with omega-3. So if we're looking at our ratios between omega-6 and omega-3, the recommended ratio is between, depending on the research that you're seeing, 4-to-1 or 2-to-1. We'll use 4-to-1. So omega-6 to omega-3. So it's normal and it's healthy to have a bit of a higher amount of omega-6 than omega-3 in comparison. But the average American, their ratio is from 20-to-1. So several times higher in omega-6 than it is omega-3. And having seed oils and vegetable oils is a big contributor to omega-6. So an easy swap that we can do, not saying that we should not have oils, because oils are great and they can be anti-inflammatory. They help us to absorb our nutrients, specifically our fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, D, E, and K. So we still want oils, we still want to have fats, but making these swaps can be really helpful. So avocado oil, specifically, I recommend using avocado oil. Well, you could use it, actually, it's very versatile. It has a pretty, subtle taste. So I think it's pretty versatile, but the nice thing about it is that it has a high smoke point, meaning that we can cook it at a high temperature before we start to see it smoke, before it gets too hot beyond the point of where it begins to degrade and it begins to break down on itself. So avocado oil is good for higher temperatures. Olive oil is another one. This is very rich in antioxidants. And this one is definitely a more delicate oil. So we want to be very careful about the context of how we use it. Better to use it at lower temperatures. If you are heating it up. It's okay for baking if you're doing like up to like 300, 350 degrees Fahrenheit is okay. But beyond that, we don't want to heat it up beyond that. So definitely not good for high temperatures, not good for frying. Olive oil has a low smoke point, meaning at a lower temperature, we're going to start to see the smoke or smell it. If you're at any point cooking with an oil and you start to smell the smoke or you see it, it is no longer anti-inflammatory. It has passed that point and it is now pro-inflammatory. So olive oil is an easy one to do that with. So I would say best practice is really to use olive oil for more like a dressing. Really great if you're making dressings at home. You could base it in olive oil, or if you just want to drizzle your food, maybe you've cooked it already, you just want to drizzle it with olive oil, that's another good way to use it. And coconut oil is another oil that we can use as well. It is also a higher smoke point, so very similar to avocado oil, definitely not as subtle in taste as avocado oil. So probably want to use it, like think about more how you use it because you could taste it a lot more. But that's another oil that would not be the omega-6. Okay, so number 4 is to make your meals colorful. And if you've ever spoken to a registered dietitian or heard a registered dietitian speak, you probably have heard this before, is to make our meals colorful or to eat the rainbow. And it really is just a simple way for us to get a variety of antioxidants, because each color is associated with a very specific antioxidant. So as opposed to having to remember, like, okay, I'm going to eat this color for this, and then I'm going to eat that color for that. You could just eat the rainbow. You could just eat a variety, and you're likely to be able to hit those different antioxidants. Very similar to what I was mentioning earlier in terms of how to get 30 different plants in the week. If you're just trying to look for more colors, you're more likely to actually hit this, versus if you are if you're having meals that are maybe like 2-tone or maybe 3-tone, where there's really not much different colors on your plate, you're less likely to hit the 30 plants per week, but then also it's not going to be as antioxidant rich. And this could be a little bit more of a challenge. I admit, if you're someone who eats the same thing every day or every week. So one of the challenges that I will present to you is when you go to the grocery store, before you check out, is do like a quick scan of after you did your list and everything, do a quick scan of the colors of your cart. And that will give you an indication on how many antioxidants you have too. Maybe if you see that it's not very colorful, you can swap a food out and try something new that week. Maybe you're trying a different fruit than you normally have, or maybe you're trying a different vegetable. Maybe it's trying another type of legume than you're used to eating, but trying to swap things out so that you're really getting that diversity that we're talking about. I think another way to do it, maybe it'll feel more natural to be cute to do that, is also to eat with the seasons. So looking at what's seasonal at the time, so you're more likely to not eat the same type of food all the time if you're eating with the seasons, or paying attention to what's seasonal. So that's another tip. I do want to show you how the different colors can relate to different types of antioxidants. So foods that are white, so allicin is the name of the antioxidant. So garlic, onions, leeks, for example, and what those help to prevent is cancer and heart disease. So those are specific to that. We have our red types of foods that have lycopene. So like berries, tomatoes, beets, watermelon are some examples. And I think this is a common one that many people know about, but lycopene is linked to prostate cancer. And I think it's common because I know for a long time, even when I was in high school, it would show on the ketchup bottle that lycopene was important for prostate cancer prevention. So orange and yellow is another one. So beta cryptothanixin, carrots, sweet potatoes, mango, papaya. So those have anti-tumor effects. Purple, anthocyanins, so grapes, eggplant, blackberries, plums, they help to prevent blood clot formation. And then our green vegetables, there's a variety. that we have in this one, but there's sulforaphane and also indole. So spinach, thinking about like our dark leafy greens, spinach, kale, collards, even our cruciferous vegetables like Brussels sprouts and broccoli, those inhibit the action of carcinogens. So in the research, we don't really necessarily see that there's one type of antioxidant that you should like really lean on specifically. The idea is really that they all are powerful. They all can help out for different reasons. So again, it goes to having that variety, that diversity, and trying to get just a combination of different ones. So our last tip number 5, is to swap out your protein. So there is a ton of research where we see a link to red meat, to cancer and inflammation. So beef, pork, lamb, for example, the recommendation is to swap those out for fish, chicken, eggs, legumes, really focusing on a more plant-forward diet in general. So trying to get the legumes too, so like beans, lentils, peas, for example, even doing like tofu, especially for tofu or fermented soy, like tempeh, can be very helpful too. And as we were talking about that, the oils piece, when we're talking about omega-3 versus omega-6, we still want to prioritize getting more omega-3. So even as we're reducing our omega-6, that's helpful. But to even really further help that ratio is to increase how many omega-3s that we have. So that can come from our fish, our fatty fish specifically. It could be salmon, sardines, tuna, and even there's some plant-based sources too for omega-3s, like walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds are also good sources. So we're just trying to tip the scale so that we can improve that ratio, and that will improve our inflammatory response. Trying Meatless Monday. So as we're moving towards having more plants into our diet, you might even consider doing plant-based days. Maybe it's like a Meatless Monday where every Monday you have a plant-based breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Or for starters, some people like to do, maybe they're just like, okay, I know I can commit to having a plant-based breakfast maybe 4 or 5 times out the week. That's another option. Or if it's lunch, if it's dinner, it's up to you. But that's just a suggestion of a way how we can begin to have more of those plant-based sources so that we're getting the fiber that's associated with it, and the plants and the antioxidants that come along with it. When we think about plants, the reason why there are so many antioxidants with plants is because they need protection. So unlike animals and humans, where we're able to seek refuge from the elements of just the weather or other elements that are around us, plants can't really do that. So instead, what they do is they produce antioxidants to protect themselves. So that's why we get it from plants. Uh-oh. All right, so I want to kind of make it even more practical for you so that you can see all these things in practice. So giving you a few ideas for breakfast, or a few ideas for meals, so including breakfast. This is a blueberry pecan overnight oats. And I actually really enjoy overnight oats because they're so versatile. So even if you don't necessarily like one ingredient, you can swap it out for another. But the general idea that we're trying to have with an overnight oats is that, of course, it has the oats and it'll have some sort of milk. That could be a plant-based milk. It could be cow's milk. Some people like to use yogurt. And then having some sort of fruit that you add on the next day. This example is blueberry, but it could be any fruit that you enjoy. And we can also add some nuts, some seeds, or getting those extra plants. Or you might enjoy doing a nut butter. So like almond butter or maybe peanut butter can be an option too. I also encourage having a source of protein. So if you're doing like a yogurt or you're doing a cow's milk, you're already getting your protein there from that, and also some of the seeds or nuts that you're adding, or nut butter. If you're doing a plant-based milk like almond milk, really low in protein. It's like 1 gram of protein per cup. So it's very low protein, but you might consider adding like a protein powder to it, or maybe like a peanut butter powder. Sometimes that could be easier to mix in versus like doing a nut butter. So just thinking about making sure you're still getting the components, which is having some protein, having some produce in there, and then having a source of fiber. And of course, bonus, because this takes no time at all. You just assemble the ingredients in the morning, it's done and it's ready to go. You can eat it cold, or you can choose to warm it up. So it's a very simple dish to put together the night before. Some people like to make it in batches where they'll make several servings of it, and then just kind of every day, or maybe like for 3-4 days, they'll just add whatever toppings they want for that particular day. Okay, so for lunch, this is the black bean zucchini and mushroom quesadilla. Optional to add cheese, even though I know it's a quesadilla, but you can add cheese, or you can choose to keep it fully plant-based where you're not adding cheese at all, or you can add like a plant-based cheese. One example, it's actually pretty easy to make. It requires a little bit of a prep, but it's pretty easy to make. So you can make like a plant-based cheese at home easily from cashews. So you would soak them ahead of time. You can soak them overnight, or if you don't have time, you can boil them for 30 minutes. You just want to make sure that they're softened. From there, you would add a plant-based milk that's unflavored, unsweetened, and blend it up together. You can add different herbs and spices, whatever type of flavor you're trying to get it to have. You can add nutritional yeast if you're wanting it to have like a cheesier type taste. If like for a quesadilla, I think a good addition would be like using like a chili, if you like a little bit of a kick, adding like a chili sauce, or like I think that's what it's called, like an adobo sauce where it has like a chipotle type feel to it. So that could be another way to play around with that. And then on the side, you can still add some more produce to it. So it could be a dried apple or a fresh apple. Keeping in mind that when we're talking about a dried fruit versus a fresh fruit, the portions are smaller because they're much more concentrated when it's dried versus fresh. But both are perfectly fine. They're high in nutrients and good choices. And this is paired with the Greek yogurt, but you can play around with that too. And then a snack in between could be tomatoes with hummus at whatever point during the day where you need a snack. Generally speaking, I would say that a meal can hold you from 4 to 5 hours, somewhere in there. Depends on, of course, like how much you're eating, how you're balancing your meals out. But that's a general rule, 4 to 5 hours. And if you have a longer time span in between meals, then it's time to have a snack, so you can bridge from meal to meal so that you don't get super, super hungry by the time that you actually are ready for your next meal. And we also don't want your blood sugars to dip too low. You'll notice it in your energy levels too when your blood sugars are dipping too low. But this is an example. We're getting some protein from the hummus, also healthy fat from the hummus, and whatever your vegetable of choice. We have tomatoes here, but maybe you prefer carrots, or maybe like bell peppers. You can definitely play around with those combinations, or even if it's maybe you're doing pretzels or something else like that. But a nice way to if you're adding a vegetable in your snack, it's a really nice way to get some produce in there without feeling like you have to eat a ton of vegetables in every single meal. You can kind of get some servings in between, so it may not feel as overwhelming. And these are actually both pretty easy to carry too. And the last one is dinner. So as I mentioned, salmon is a really good source of omega-3. So if you do enjoy fish, this is a great option. If you have an air fryer, this is also a really simple way to put together pretty much everything in this particular recipe. So you can make the salmon in the air fryer. You can do roasted Brussels sprouts in the air fryer. And then the roasted tomatoes and pesto can also be made in the air fryer. So we're having our air fryer salmon with Brussels sprouts, wild rice or another grain that you enjoy, or I would say grain or carb. So it could be wild rice, it could be brown rice, it could be jasmine rice, it could be maybe it's a legume like peas, or maybe it's beans or lentils if you prefer that instead, or maybe you're having some sort of like pasta like that has more fiber would be a good option. Roasted tomatoes and pesto as well, so we're getting some more plants there. And one thing I do want to leave you with is that when we think about an anti-inflammatory diet, it's not really an all or nothing type situation. Again, thinking about balance, and we're thinking about how our body wants to always be in balance and homeostasis. We can think about that in the same way as it comes to nutrition. And I think that's how it becomes practical. When we have the all or nothing mindset, that's usually when things are not sustainable. So if you're eating something that maybe we didn't specifically talk about as being high in antioxidants, it's okay. We're just thinking about the overall load of inflammation in our bodies. So our bodies can handle inflammation. It's just when we have the chronic inflammation, remember, is when our bodies have a really hard time. So sure, you can have things that are not as anti-inflammatory in your diet, but what are we eating in addition to those foods that can help to balance off that inflammatory load? So at this time, I could take questions. This is my information. If you guys have any questions, if you want to reach out to me privately, here's my email address, alexis@alexisbrooksnutrition.com. My website is connectwithalexis.com. And then I'm also on social media. My name's the same for all three, for Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. It's Alexis Brooks Nutrition. But please feel free to ask any questions that you have.
Well, first off, thank you so much, Alexis. Loved just how you presented the information and then you showed it in action with a meal plan. I'm definitely hungry, and I would imagine you are too. Some questions came through the chat, so I'll start there, but I also want to invite people to unmute themselves if they have a question they would like to ask out loud. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the time remaining, and I'll just kind of go in the order that I'm seeing them. So again, I'll start with some in the chat, and then I'll invite people to unmute themselves. Someone asked, can legumes cause inflammation?